every country is entitled to have its own migration policy, but I certainly don't intend to allow anybody else's migration policy affect the integrity of our own one.
So, the EU Migration Pact was passed through the Dáil by the slimmest of margins at the 11th hour. Quite literally, the vote finally took place at around 11 p.m. on Wednesday, 26th of June. 79 votes in favour to 72 votes against. You'd wonder why this vote wasn't taken before the local and European elections, wouldn't you? Now, while there were some notable names missing, there were also no abstentions, which would imply that the pairing system was used for those that were unable to attend the vote. The pairing system means that if a member expects to be absent for a vote, he or she may pair off with another member who will be present and who would vote on the other side of the question, but who agrees not to vote. And again, it would appear that this is what happened here since there were no abstentions. Anyway, on to what the vote means. Well, it means that we are opting into the EU Migration Pact, and obviously the question is, why would we do that? So let's take a quick look at the pact. So according to the European Commission website, there are 4 main pillars of this new pact. Some of the proposals actually make sense and really should be in place anyway. In particular, I'm talking about the Eurodac Regulation, which would turn the existing database into a fully fledged asylum and migration database, ensuring clear identification of everyone who enters the EU as an asylum seeker or an irregular migrant. This would tie in with the robust screening element, which will register all irregular migrants while ID, security and health checks are carried out. This should make it much easier to keep track of asylum seekers or other irregular migrants entering and moving about within the EU. As for the rest, well, that's where the problems begin. Ultimately, agreeing to this pact is agreeing to whatever the EU decide is best when it comes to dealing with irregular migration and asylum seekers. Sinn Féin have called this pact an erosion of Irish sovereignty, and it's hard to disagree, especially when we could have just as easily have opted out, as is our right to do so. Just like Denmark, we were under no obligation to enter into this pact, and it would appear that Denmark only opted into those parts they felt were beneficial. Poland and Hungary have also voiced strong opposition to this new pact. Hungarian President Viktor Orban had particularly strong words against it. So what elements do I feel are problematic? Well, it's the solidarity part, isn't it? Right, so I can completely understand why some countries, particularly border countries, might not be too thrilled with the Dublin regulations and would want to change them. But this is not the way. Right, so the solidarity mechanism creates a solidarity pool, setting up the needs for the year in absolute terms, total number for relocations and total number for financial contributions. What that means is each year the EU will take the projected number of arrivals for the upcoming year and decide how many relocations each member state must take and what the financial contributions will be. The minimum thresholds are 30,000 relocations a year and €600 million a year. Now, no country will be expected to meet both of those minimums. A combination of both will suffice, as member states will have full discretion to choose among the different types of solidarity. As the EU Commission website puts it, the ratio will be 1 relocation to €20,000, so 30,000 relocations or €600 million. Right, so the idea is that each member state either takes in a minimum number of asylum seekers or international protection applicants, or whatever term they want to use, as both seem interchangeable at this point, or they pay €20,000 per asylum seeker they don't take. This payment is then put into the Solidarity Fund, which is used to help those countries taking in more migrants than others, that is, those countries the asylum seekers would be relocated from. Now, that's a simplified version of events. There are criteria to be met before you can benefit from this solidarity pool, for example. Now, a couple of other things to note before we go any further. First is that the EU will be in charge of what countries it deems to be safe, and second, the relocations will be for asylum seekers, not those who have actually been granted refugee status. So there may well be refusals amongst that figure of 30,000. Right, that's a basic overview. The actual pact goes into far more detail in various areas, and I'll add some links in the description below for further reading for those interested. But the basic overview is really all we need to understand how this is not a good deal for Ireland, and to question why we gave up our ability to opt out of this when we had no obligation to enter enter into it at all. Justice Minister Helen McEntee has claimed that this pact will result in faster processing of applications, stronger border security, and faster returns. That's a bit optimistic, isn't it? Yes, the new Eurodac regulations will make it easier to keep track of who's who, which could speed up processing, but only if we actually have the capacity to deal with the proposed numbers, which we clearly don't. In 2022, there were 13,651 applications for international protection here in Ireland. In 2023, that figure was 13,277. As of May 7th this year, we have already seen 7,667 applications. And we have seen the so-called tent cities popping up around Dublin because we simply cannot handle that many applications. As per the Department of Justice, the median processing time in April 2022 through to determination was 82 weeks. Now, the new Migration Pact aims to reduce processing times to 12 weeks across the board throughout the EU, but that seems like an absolute pipe dream for Ireland, doesn't it? I mean, 82 weeks for the numbers right now compared to 12 weeks for the projected minimum of 30,000. As Michael McDowell explained in the Shannon, if we take in 30,000 a year, that will mean 120 applications processed every working day if you work 5 days a week for 50 weeks of the year. Do we really think we can ramp up to that? And where are we to house these applicants? Already we are seeing our capacity outstripped, and that's with funneling public money into the hands of private property owners to supplement our very limited capacity. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And remember, 30,000 is the absolute minimum, and depending on projections, it could be a lot higher. So this brings us on to the other aspect of the Solidarity Pact, the idea that we can pay €20,000 per applicant we don't, or more likely can't, take. That is, again, public money being paid in what amounts to a fine for not taking in our fair share according to the EU. And sure, they don't call it a fine, it's a solidarity pool, but let's be real here. Just like the deposit return scheme deposit is actually a ransom, this financial contribution is nothing more than a fine. They can use whatever language they like to try and frame it otherwise, but it's clearly a fine. And considering our capacity and processing issues, you can bet your arse we'll end up paying this fine. Again, public money. Again, when we could have simply opted out altogether. Like, I just can't see the benefits here for Ireland to enter into this pact. Am I missing something? Worse again is how the EU will determine each member state's fair share. They're going to look at population and GDP. Now, we're a small country, so have a small population. Yes, we're not very densely populated, but I would have thought turning the whole country into a concrete jungle wouldn't be good for our climate targets, right? I mean, the EU keep telling us we need to go green. Well, Ireland is pretty fucking green, isn't it? So yeah, small population, but one that is also suffering through a disaster of a housing crisis. And as for GDP, fucking hell, everyone and their granny knows that Ireland's GDP is inflated due to the sheer volume of multinationals we have here. Our GDP may tell the world that we're super rich, but we all know that is far from the truth for the ordinary citizens of this country. And yet, GDP is what will be used to determine Ireland's fair share. Do we really believe our contribution will only be calculated at 30,000? Yeah, didn't think so. Add all that up, and I just can't see what possible upsides there are for Ireland. We are ceding control of our immigration policies to the EU. Do we really believe the EU will put Irish interests first and will really understand our limitations? Because I don't. That's a job for our own public representatives, and it should be up to us to determine our limits. Other than the sharing of information through Eurodac, where are the positives for Ireland? We'll either have to take in more than we can handle, or pay a fine from money that could be used for the betterment of Ireland. Now, from what I can gather, Denmark have only opted into the Eurodac and information sharing aspects of this new pact. Unfortunately, every time I tried to search for more info on this, Google unhelpfully threw up results about Ireland instead, and I just don't have the time to trawl through the internet for confirmation, but that is what appears to to have happened with Denmark, which just begs the question, why on earth couldn't we have done the same? I think I'll hazard a guess here. It's not that we couldn't, it's that those in charge didn't want to. And why? Well, call me cynical, but Michael McGrath's new promotion to the role of EU Commissioner is one answer. Our government want a seat at the Commissioner's table, and selling out our sovereignty to get there is a price they are willing to pay, and to show the EU that we are willing to do what they want. Another reason, in my view, is that our government know how badly they are failing when it comes to immigration, and so they've taken the easy option to abdicate all responsibility for it. They clearly have no handle on immigration, as seen by the whack-a-mole reactionary approach they take to every new issue that comes up. And they know from numerous polls that the electorate are not happy about it. By opting into the Migration Pact, they can let someone else set the agenda so they don't have to. They'll have someone else to tell them what to do without having to come up with solutions themselves, and they'll have someone else to try to scapegoat when things go wrong. And that also ultimately answers the questions surrounding why this proposal was debated and teased out for the absolute bare minimum of time, and why each individual aspect wasn't debated in full to only opt into those areas which would actually be helpful. Ultimately, our sovereign right to determine our own immigration policies has just been handed over willingly to the EU, and I can't see how that is anything other than a horrible decision that will have disastrous consequences for our country. The negatives far outweigh the positives in my view, and I really just despair at what has been done. We've just created a rod to beat ourselves with, haven't we? So what do you think? Am I overreacting? Was this the right way to go? Will opting in fully actually be a blessing in disguise? Or are we just walking into a disaster? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified of new content. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a coffee or a super thanks, which is greatly appreciated, and a big thank you to those that already have. You can also follow me on Twitter. Until next time, slán go fóill.